My name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you're listening to the New Stack podcast from Cloud Native Day, brought to you by Cisco. Check out Mantle, Cisco's open source microservices infrastructure, pulling together the best of open source projects, including Docker, Kubernetes, and Ansible. Learn more at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at Cloud Native Day in Toronto, Canada. Here with Joseph Jacks, who is one of the, I think, veterans of the whole container ecosystem. Yeah. I'm saying it, and particularly around Kubernetes. And you're now with Apprenda.
Yep.
And I'm also joined by co-host Lee Calcote, who has been a big part of the New Stack over the past several months, and now is with SolarWinds. So, welcome everyone. So, Joseph, I would like to talk a little bit about kind of this intersection of platform as a service and Kubernetes.
Yep.
Because Apprenda, where you are now, and Kismatic got acquired by Apprenda, where you were previously you're one of the co-founders at Kismatic. Apprenda has traditionally been known as a platform as a service, right?
Yep.
And it made a shift to Kubernetes. Maybe you can tell us about that shift, and what is this intersection of platform as a service and Kubernetes, and how do you define it?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of ideas and opinions around this, but spent a lot of time talking with Sinclair Schuler, who's the founder and CEO of Apprenda, and have refined my perspectives on this a little bit. Sinclair's spent a decade of his life in this space,
right?
And he's got some really, really cool ideas. Actually, today just published a blog post on the PaaS versus containers. Is that a real viable question? And sort of elaborated on some of these concepts. So I would encourage you to look at that and get some of his take on it. But my view is, I think platform as a service has been around for a long time now. Since 12-Factor Manifesto came out, people, had a lot of sort of very opinionated familiarity around what PaaS meant through 12-factor sort of patterns and principles. And after Heroku started to get a lot of traction, obviously Google App Engine and a large number of offerings sort of started to emulate those patterns and build opinionated products around them. So having said that, though, I think each product really tried to solve the problems of deployment and management and testing and monitoring and integration and the application abstraction. All of them tried to do those things differently. And so that's where I think the core fundamental confusion has been around PaaS, because there's been lots of different products. I think PaaS as the sort of, as the NIST model defines it, is less of a, and this is going back to kind of what Sinclair was saying in his blog post, less of a technology and more of a sort of
concept.
Well, it's more of a, I would say, definitely more of a concept, more of an architectural paradigm than a specific technology. And so that's where I think we're starting to see a lot of resurgence around sort of reincarnating the ideas of 12-factor and sort of maybe taking some of those ideas and their constituent parts and building new systems based around containers, which have a lot of similar properties.
Seems like, yeah.
So that's kind of my take. I didn't really talk about Apprenda or Kismatic or anything in there, but that's my take. And the other thing is, there's a recent thing, and you'll find that very few of these ideas are mine. Just like sort of piecing things between different what people have said in different industries or different things. But there's this idea of bundling and unbundling.
Right.
From I'm not sure who actually said that first, but in the TV sort of, or the media industry, people would buy this big box that would come with all the gear and the subscriptions for everything. And now we're starting to see these over the top or OTT style products that have very specific services that are sort of componentized away from your actual display device and all the different services that you would hook up to that display device that were previously vertically integrated. So things were very vertically integrated. Now they're starting to get sort of decomposed and broken apart, and then I think they'll get vertically integrated again. It's just sort of different cycles.
So I think pendulum swings.
Yeah, the pendulum swings, and that'll continue to happen. I'm not sure if it's going to happen again and again in the sort of the platform layer of the NIST model. I think it'll probably get unbundled, and then it'll stay unbundled to a certain extent. But people will continue to call it PaaS. And so with the lines blurring and all these things sort of getting a little bit more confusing for people, I think it's actually driven by specialization and the need to have specific features on a customer case by case basis that are driving all this unbundling. So
Right.
so PaaS sort of represented a lot of concepts and a lot of properties that were sort of previously vertically integrated, and now they're starting to get unbundled, and people are building their own sort of, you squint at them, building their own PaaS systems using tools or using, just building everything from scratch.
Yeah.
I think that's going to continue to happen, and I think it'll actually be the dominant way platform as a service actually gets adopted as a sort of an architectural concept in large companies.
Lee, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, just, I want to harass JJ, actually.
Harass me away, Lee.
Well, so JJ, a couple of truths that I want you to, speak to. So 12 factor equals stateless, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe another one, just kind of going back to maybe Sinclair's post, which I didn't get a chance to read, but so PaaS versus containers, that's like the right way to ask that question, right? Or and actually, I'm just trying to jive you at this point, but or I think that part of the premise of what you are saying is that PaaS isn't a technology unto its own; it's a framework for a collection of technologies.
Yep.
It's in some respects kind of an opinionated way of helping people deliver applications more quickly.
But there's a spectrum to it.
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum to it. I mean, so there's the vendor. There's a very vendor-oriented perspective of this, and I spend a lot of time with customers and end users, and so I've got a lot of the observations based around conversations with those types of companies and people. I try and spend most of my time with just talking with people who actually use the technology in companies, and that's why with KubeCon, we try and emphasize end users, more than vendors. But I think the vendor sort of perspective on this is PaaS should be a very specific pattern for a certain end customer or an end user, like IT operations or like platform engineering teams who are looking for specific types of functionality that they want to serve up. On the other side, with the customer perspective of PaaS, it's more like, wow, that's an end state I want to get to. I don't necessarily have a view of PaaS being limited to a delivery model as much as it is going to allow me to move faster and actually achieve business results. And so that's why there's a huge amount of companies actually either doing a build approach where they're just building their own system that gets them to what PaaS promises, or they're going to buy something. They're going to buy a product. They're going to buy something like Pivotal Cloud Foundry. They're going to buy an OpenShift. Or they're going to buy something else that's packaged or subscribe to that model. And I think both things will continue. I'm just more heavily, personally, of the opinion that over time, the more dominant pattern will be the decomposed unbundling version of PaaS. Not because it allows people to have that flexibility and customization, but it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to sufficiently generalize things in a how Brian Gracely says it, structured platform as a service across a product or a project.
Lee?
That's my view.
Yeah, so along that, it sounds like maybe another way to characterize that, and you actually began to characterize which customers are and which use cases are maybe best suited for PaaS versus not. But to continue to characterize that, there's certain use cases and certain customers that really benefit from someone else having made the choices around what those bundled technologies are. And then there's certain environments with maybe different skill sets or different organizations that really, either already have an investment in an incumbent piece of technology and need a way to plug that into their architecture. And Alex, I think you were talking about this earlier. But it sounds like, JJ, you're of the perspective that the more decomposed architecture, the more freedom of choice is potentially kind of longer term where you would see
to make it or is it more making the platform more composable?
Yeah, composability is another word for sure. I mean, I think
so. It could be like Voltron. That was the analogy.
Sure.
We were talking about last week at Intel Developer Forum about things like Grafana and Snap. It's like
I like giving Jonathan Murray credit here because composable enterprise was his thing. So composability and composable platforms are really powerful when you have a lot of specialization in technology, whether it's programming languages or monitoring or logging or CI/CD or how you do persistence of your artifacts, registry for your images, whatever. There's so much polyglot sort of qualities across all the layers in a platform as a service architecture that people are going to have a really hard time finding something that is truly generalized across many of those areas. And that's why I think things like Kubernetes are going to be very dominant in the future, and it's starting to look that way.
So what is your new job?
That's a good question. my new job. So we got acquired by Apprenda, joined Apprenda. I was really doing a lot of different things. I tend to be focused more on product and engineering now than I was in sort of the first, sort of 45 days. So doing a lot of really exciting stuff there, learning a ton, having a lot of fun.
As you focus on that product and as you engage with some of those customers that you were talking about, have you begun to find particular patterns or of needs that they have of a system like Kubernetes that either Kubernetes already has and they just didn't know, or maybe things that they need that Kubernetes doesn't quite yet have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's the big question. The big question is what is missing from Kubernetes today to make it truly consumable as a quote-unquote platform that can meet the needs of IT operations as well as the needs of a developer without having to go to a low level and sort of cobble together things and manage this big sprawl of YAML JSON config files and all these different things.
So for example, networking.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that Kubernetes is actually drawing very hard lines that Google and many others in the community who are writing code every day are saying, we are not going to try and solve that problem as a first-class thing in Kubernetes. Networking is one. Another one is monitoring and logging. There's lots of different systems that can hook into Kubernetes. From a monitoring perspective, we've got great systems like Prometheus.
Persistent storage, too.
Absolutely. Storage is another really big one. We've got a huge ecosystem. So on the periphery of Kubernetes, there's things that you use to operationalize it in an enterprise that are frankly not there for design reasons, not for we're at a 2-year mark and there's a roadmap item that's going to solve that in 9 months. It's more of there are a set of primitives, there's an API server that gives you a data model to communicate in a common way to your data center and all your applications in that data center. And there are agents that run on your nodes to run your applications. Kubernetes is a very simple model. And for people who try and overcomplicate it with, there's 50 primitives and there's all these things going on, that I think that ends up confusing people and giving people this perception that Kubernetes is going to grow into solving major complexities in networking and storage, in monitoring and logging, in all these other aspects. I think it is still a fairly important, I think it is a very important conversation for the Kubernetes community specifically to be having around where the lines get drawn really hard. I think right now they're still somewhat blurry in some areas, but they're pretty clear in others. So with networking, there's lots of systems out there that basically extend the native layer 2 network model in Kubernetes to cover things like, sort of layer 2, layer 7 networking is kind of natively available in Kubernetes. Layer 2, completely available by default, and layer 7 is sort of an add-on through this Ingress API, which lets you do sort of layer 7 DNS SSL based, routing and termination and networking at the layer 7 layer. And then outside of that, Kubernetes works well with different layer 3 through 4 systems like Contrail and Calico and Romana and many others. that are solving things at the policy level. So there's a long list of things that, as you look at the data center, like what does the data center actually look like today for distributed applications, like pre-Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is only 2 years old. There's been distributed apps running in data centers for a long time. There's like a myriad of things to solve for when you're actually talking about running things in production. So I think that the lines are going to get drawn pretty hard because of the fact that they need to get drawn hard, given that Kubernetes is just going to evolve into this huge thing if they aren't drawn.
And so speaking of growing and getting huge, that kind of the community around Kubernetes has just been, you take a look at something like OpenStack, just a massive, community around that, all kinds of companies, just, thousands of contributors.
Yeah.
As you've been kind of, from day zero, so to speak, through Kismatic and into Apprenda with that community as it's grown, any growing pains that you found or ways to overcome?
Yeah, I think we're starting to hit some major growing pains right now around the community management aspects. There really isn't a very clear process for, and this is a big discussion that I've been having with many people, but Sarah Novotny is probably closest to all this because she's just sort of synthesizing all these different conversations. Right. It'd be awesome to have her here to chime in on this, but like there are so many things that need to get figured out, just in terms of herding all of the opinions and the ideas around features, around contributions, around how do contentious issues get sorted, where do the sort of empirical lines get drawn as far as who makes those decisions.
Do you need a benevolent dictator?
I think that we want to move away from the idea of a benevolent dictator. So up until this point in time, a benevolent dictator idea has sort of plagued the long-term success of a lot of open source projects.
Yep.
And Kubernetes has certainly fallen victim to that early on, and through CNCF, which is this great first public event that we're at, Cloud Native Day, we're starting to see that get allayed.
I think you could arguably say that about Docker.
I totally agree. And so the thing that excites us about Kubernetes is all these contentious issues are starting to get solved in a much more democratized fashion. And that's an amazing advantage that this project has over many other projects that really have one dominant vendor behind them. And I think that like the net, and I really don't want to get into like talking about other projects, but the net benefit is that all these technologies are moving these ideas forward, and they're causing people to think more deeply about how they write their applications in a distributed way. So I think it's actually awesome that there's competition, all these things happening. But the thing with Kubernetes is I think it's been able to make as much progress with as much code in as short a period of time because of the fact that the project was actually decoupled from Google and brought into CNCF, as 1.0 came out. So having said that, there's lots of things like your question was what are the sort of growing pains? I think some of the growing pains are definitely around community, but also around manageability of the roadmap, and also execution of the current parallel activities. So there's 870 something people contributing to the project that have actually gotten things merged in. People look at this number and they go, wow, that's huge. With the current set of PRs that are open, with the things that actually need to get solved, Kubernetes actually needs 2 or 3 more, 2 to 3 times more the number of contributors that are currently involved in the project.
That's interesting, and it also speaks to a theme that we've been hearing a lot more about, and that's how there have been a lot of tools built for managing open source communities, but there's not as many tools for managing people in the communities, right? So like you have tools for like managing, the process for, the commits or whatever it might be, right? But there's not as many ways to manage kind of just the number of people who are contributing to a project, and how you then, and create some automations around that.
I'll give a big shout out to Brandon Phillips from CoreOS on a recent thing that he's been working on with other folks from Google and from the community around an incubation process for Kubernetes. Something like that is very much needed now in the current size and growth of the project, and it looks like it's getting traction and it'll actually get accepted. So if that, does progress, then we're going to see a lot more organization and sanity around what does the future of the project look like. So I think a lot of these things.
So what is that incubator approach?
Yeah, so it actually takes some ideas from the Apache Software Foundation incubation process, as well as just saying there's things that are in the core project that maybe shouldn't necessarily be in the core project because they're still sort of in the state of limbo. And I'll simplify and give you a quick description of this, but and then other things that maybe should be in the core project that are in sort of off-tree repositories. So a lot of these things actually need a structured proposal to get sorted, and Brandon and a bunch of others have started to write that up and codify it, and as soon as that gets fully accepted and integrated, then a lot of these things are going to get sorted pretty quickly.
Yeah. And that's an area where a foundation like the CNCF will intentionally be hands off in terms of how it is that the structure of community and how new functionality is built into a project like Kubernetes, so that foundation can provide support for the project, but not be that benevolent dictator that we were kind of talking about before. So that's nice. I guess I wasn't aware that there was that incubation process that was kind of up and coming. So that's heartening.
So Apprenda, it's primarily been a platform that was built by the Apprenda team. I don't know really of any open source projects really associated with Apprenda at the moment. Will that direction change?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, Apprenda is almost 10 years old. So the company's been around for quite a while, primarily based in upstate New York, founded by Sinclair Schuler and a couple other folks. So the original vision of the company was Sinclair was a software engineer at Morgan Stanley. Took him a couple months to write an application. Took him 6 to 9 months to get it deployed, to stand up infrastructure, to get things going. Right. And the pain and frustration that resulted basically drove him to start a company. And again, this is I think roughly just before, or like sort of in a parallel universe as 12-factor was coming out, as Heroku was created and all of that. So very forward-thinking early on, and the company's been around for a long time, about 150 people now. Traditionally very focused on proprietary software development and product development. So the Apprenda cloud platform is a proprietary software product, solving very high-end, like large enterprise problems in the SDLC to reduce a lot of the friction that starts to pop up when you operate in very compliance and regulatory prone organizations like big banks, telco, media, insurance, retail, and so on. So the Apprenda customer base is mostly comprised of Fortune 2000 sort of size companies. And so, the really interesting thing is we've joined the company is the strategy is very centered around Kubernetes, but also around open source and around cultural changes inside of the company, moving from proprietary software development to open source software development, which is really exciting. And I think we heard, Linus Torvalds earlier this week talk about his take on proprietary software development, where it actually makes sense in a lot of areas where there's a lot of value and benefit to a system that may actually not have a similar equivalent in the open source world. So you really don't you don't have a choice. You want to solve a problem, you may not have time to write something from scratch, and you'll invariably end up building something. So Apprenda's actually been solving some really hard fundamental problems around governance, policy, orchestration, management in the sort of acceleration of the SDLC in big companies, and so that's the platform that they've had in the market, and that's still very very relevant and in solving some major challenges for customers. The work that we're doing is very much towards the future of cloud native application development with microservices and distributed applications and container based architectures and all these things, which interestingly has a lot of parallels with what Apprenda's been solving for. So, Apprenda's been around way before, Docker containers, been around way before the microservices trend, way before, you sort of looked at these projects, right, trying to solve all these different problems. So, And interestingly, though, you look at the, and this is some of the things that I'm still learning and getting excited about, and sort of appreciating how forward thinking the founders of the company were and are. Is, you look at Apprenda and you kind of squint at it a little bit. It actually kind of looks like Kubernetes, but the thing's been around for a decade. And so we actually take a lot of the interesting ideas that have been built for very high-end enterprise customers in non-web scale internet sort of environments where there's a very heterogeneous environment of operating systems across Windows and Linux and other things, as well as application platforms and languages and runtimes. And then looking at something like Kubernetes, which is built from today forward for all the new modern technology, built for containers, built for microservices and cloud native patterns, and marrying those two things is really compelling for huge enterprises because they've spent billions of dollars with their existing assets, but they also want to move to the future. So
what are you guys going to open source? We
only
got a few minutes.
So the open sourcing work is pretty active around some of the existing Apprenda IP. We're also working on a lot of net new product development on the Kubernetes side. Okay. So pretty excited about that.
What criteria do you use as pivot points for making those decisions about what in fact is open source and isn't, whether it's an old project or a new?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, it all depends on the value to the user and what people, where the white spaces are and the gaps are today. So if we, and that's how we're kind of making the decision is, based on what we see will deliver the most value, as well as what is currently developed and can, get open sourced relatively easily. I think that's what we're looking at.
Well, great. Well, this has been very helpful to help better understand the Apprentice direction, and look forward to following its progress. And congratulations to you. And is Patrick still with the Apprenda team, or did he move on?
Yeah, he's moved on.
He's moved on. Yeah. Good. Okay, great. Well, all the best, and we'll keep in touch and follow the path of Kubernetes and Apprenda.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very good.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, JJ. Thanks, Alex.
You're listening to the New Stack podcast from Cloud Native Day, brought to you by Cisco. Check out Mantle, Cisco's open source microservices infrastructure, pulling together the best of open source projects, including Docker, Kubernetes, and Ansible. Learn more at mantle.io. That's MANTL.io.